There we go. Okay.
All right. Well, welcome in the room, everyone. And we're so excited to be having this discussion really about a topic that we know is top of mind for many of you who are experiencing some form of trauma in your lives, or you know someone who's experienced trauma, or maybe they're experiencing this right now. And so we want you to really take this moment to kind of use this as a reset, use it as an opportunity to receive input from the experts in the room, but also use it as an opportunity of providing you inspiration and hope that there is a way to get to the other side, and there is life after you experience so much trauma in your life. And so with that being said, what I'd like to do is go ahead and introduce the ladies that are in the room right now. First, we have Jola Grace Emmanuel. She is a domestic violence survivor. She is the soul doctor and a certified life and trauma recovery coach. She's helped trauma victims and those who are broken and emotionally wounded and abused to heal and to reinvent themselves for an excellent life. And even though she had her first degree in accountancy, her second degree is in financial decision analyst, and she is passionate about health, healing, and healing of the soul. She is a mental health advocate and certified cognitive behavior therapist and associate member of the European Bureau. Next, we have Victoria McAuliffe. Or McAfee, sorry, McAfee. Sorry. And she, her mother and her daughter were in abusive relationships. Victoria is an internationally recognized writer and speaker with a passion for women's Bible study and serving others who are suffering with sexual abuse issues and emotional pain. She serves as a campus at the campus Crusade for Christ and as a crisis Pregnancy Resource Center as an assistant director, and at the Movie Bible Institute as an extension instructor. Victoria's books include Blessed is She, the transforming prayer journal of 30 African American women, Sisters' Guides to In-Depth Bible Study, Restoring Broken Vessels. She has also been featured writer in Our Daily Bread. She resides in Milwaukee, Wisconsin with her husband, David, and she spends most of her professional life working with victims in domestic violence. And then finally, we have Maureen Tokeson-Martin. She is the CEO and founder of Blaq app, connecting healers to technology and allies to create safety and opportunity to heal in safe places. And so first, I would like to come to you, Maureen. This is your vision. This is your idea. This is your baby. And I just want you to share with us, why this and why now?
So I guess post-pandemic, we noticed, what was noticed was that there was an increase in domestic violence, incidences of domestic violence, and their numbers being reported. There's higher numbers in the Black and Brown community. Additionally, we're seeing the statistics are 1 in 4 women are experiencing some level of domestic violence, domestic or partner violence, and 1 in 3 high schoolers are experiencing partner violence as well. So, in terms of wanting the world to be a safer place for people, I believe that what we do at Blaq app in terms of safety technology needs to be in places where survivors and victims reside, and that is in the space of relationships and families.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maureen, just for creating this space and this platform for us to be able to share in this space. First, I'd like to go to Victoria. You are an author and a speaker. Share with us just a little bit more about yourself. I've read your bio, but please share with us something that you want the audience to know as we get to know you and get to know a part of your experience and really helping the women to get to that next step. So if you don't mind, Victoria, just sharing a little bit more about you.
Well, my first experience with domestic violence was in my own home. I was a child when my parents would fight off and on, and I would have, times when I was down on my hands and knees. My mother would be under my bunk bed trying to hide from my dad. And I'd be screaming at him not to hurt mama, and seeing bruises on her arms from time to time and asking her what that was. And she said, from drinking too much Kool-Aid. And he would take us, me and my older sister, when they would start fighting, he would take us to my grandmother's house. And there, I would try to tell my grandmother, my aunts, my uncles that, mom and daddy are fighting, hoping somebody would go down to the house and see about my mother, and no one would ever go. And so I just stayed with that trauma and that fear until I saw my mother, walking up the stairs and knew she was okay. So the irony of the whole thing is that we were a church-going family. My father directed the choir. My mother was a Sunday school teacher. And we were not allowed to say anything about what was going on in our home for years. And we had to put that church face on, the smile, and act like everything was just fine. And I remember one time as a young adult coming home, and my mother had been pushed down the basement stairs, and my aunt was there, and she was trying to convince my father to stay in the home. And I was standing there thinking, no, he needs to leave. But I mean, I had no knowledge of domestic violence or no training in it, or no one had ever talked to me about it, but I just knew it wasn't a good thing for them to stay together. But they did, because in that day, separations and divorces were not popular, and they didn't want to go through the shame and the embarrassment of it. And they didn't realize the impact that it was having on us as children. Fast forward that 20, 30 years, I started working in social service, crisis pregnancy centers, boys group homes, homeless shelters. And my last job was in a domestic violence agency. And I had no idea that I was going to end up there, and that a lot of these memories would start flooding back. I remember going to a funeral at my church, and it was rumored that the man had killed the woman, but there he sat on the first row with the other children, and everybody acting like nothing, they were saying it, but I'm like, why isn't this man in jail? And why is he allowed to continue to father these children? And y'all are saying he's responsible for this woman's death. I mean, there was just so many unanswered questions, and the secrecy. And here I'm in this agency 30 years later, and working in churches, and coming up against the same kind of, shh, don't say anything, don't talk about that. We really can't intervene in this or help in this particular issue. So it's really been heavy on my heart for a long time. And I would love to walk away from it. I've tried a couple of times, but it just keeps coming back on my plate. And my publisher at this time is expecting a book out of me. And I'm like, okay, here we go again, just with the stories, and just once again, pushing the church to be a safe place for women who are going through this, for the whole family, for the abuser, and the children involved as well.
Wow, Jola, as you hear, and I'm sure it resonates with many women who are watching this right now, the commonality around Victoria's story and the experiences that looks like. And, you're here in this space and having been a domestic violence survivor, and know some of those indicators and some of those things that are like warning signs, right, for those who are in that space, but also the other side of hope, right? There's another side to that, that's hope. And so if you don't mind just sharing a little bit about yourself and the hope that you've seen and that transformation that you've walked through yourself, but also the transformation that you've been able to help others to walk through as well, because I think that that's so important for people to know and understand that there is hope after. And because sometimes you can be so stuck in the middle of what you're experiencing that you feel like it is completely hopeless and there is nothing else. So if you would share in reference to that.
Good evening. Thank you all so very much. I think my story sort of is a bit similar to Victoria's, mom and daughter, in that the abuse that I experienced happened in the church. And you would think that a church is the last place something like that will happen to you. You want to be there for protection, for safety, and then you're meeting that there. In fact, for me, I remember that when I exited the relationship, it affected my work with God, because I was at a point where I felt, I'm not sure if I still wanted to be a Christian, because what has been portrayed to me as God was bad. It was wrong. It was all shades of not nice. So I felt, okay, if this is really what God is about, I don't think I really want to, go down this path again. I don't think I want to do this, and I was just there. But, God in his mercy had to reveal himself to me in a different way, and one of the lessons I learned from that is, don't allow anybody to portray God to you in a way that he is not. Okay, find God by yourself, because God is good and God is kind, and human beings will always fall. So even where everything is perfect, where you have, well, not perfect, because nowhere really is perfect, but where the ideal is, you have a church where this ideal is, everything is what they're supposed to be. I still need to understand that they are still human beings, and they can be faulted, they can make mistakes, and they are not the ideal. Right. So God is still the ideal. So for me, I was, in that relationship for 16 years. And at that point, at most of those years, I didn't believe that there was an option for me. I felt, okay, so this is it. This is where my life is going to end. I've made this mistake. I'm in this mess. I'm going to be in this for the rest of my life, And, you get to a point where you know that, okay, I've already made a mistake, but you don't see any option. So you just tell yourself, well, I'll just die, and at least, there's really nothing I can do, So I was at that point for a long time in my life. I knew this was wrong. I knew I'd made a mistake, but I didn't see any way out, because I felt we're supposed to be Christians, and God hates divorce, and it's for better, for worse, is, so I just felt, wow, what's a choice that's, this is how my life is going to end. I just didn't see. And I think also, unfortunately for me, how abusers are, they will isolate you. So they will make sure that you don't have access to people who can make you see that what you're going through is not normal, because they work on your mind. So I say to people that your mind is your greatest asset, which is why abuse is evil in all of its ramification. Because the abuser, first of all, starts working on your mind. Nobody can slap you, hit you first without messing up your mind. Because if you're walking on the road and somebody as much as just, shrugs shoulders with you, you will stop and you will sort of give the person a challenging look, like, did you see me? You just stepped on me, or you just hit me. You will, there will be that normal reflection. So how come somebody hits you repeatedly and you don't challenge the person? You don't fight back. You don't say anything. In fact, you say, oh, it's because he loves me, or it's because she loves me. Because I normally say that abuse is not gender biased, that they are doing this to me. It's because the person has first of all worked on your mind to make you believe that you're nothing, you're no good, you don't have any value. If not for me in your life, you better be happy that I'm in your life, and all of that. So for me, I didn't see anywhere else. I wasn't able to talk to anybody that could tell me. In fact, for 14 years, I didn't know that it was abuse. Nobody around me called it abuse, because he made sure that the people that I was exposed to were people, I believe, who sort of have the same mindset. So it was in the 15th year that I met my spiritual mother, who I spoke about the other day, who said to me, this is abuse and it is wrong. So by the grace of God, I was able to exit, help of my spiritual mom, my biological parents, my family. And again, coming out, I felt, okay, well, at least I'm out. At least I'm not dead. At least I'm not going to die. Let me just wake up, sleep, wake up, sleep, wake up, sleep. But I then began to realize that I was still experiencing a lot of the negative emotions that I was experiencing while I was in the marriage. So anytime I wanted to do anything, I would hear voices in my head like, you're stupid, you're foolish. Do you really think you can do this? Nobody likes you. I was hearing those voices, and I had to attend therapy. I was clinically diagnosed with depression. I had to be on medication then. And anytime I tell my therapist that, she will say to me, no, you're not there again. It's not with you. You have to start saying some things, affirmation. And that was how I began my journey of healing and reinvention, and the journey took me a while, but by the grace of God, I was able to go through that journey. I was able to heal, and I was able to rediscover myself. And the self that I discovered, every time I sit down, I say, God, I thank you that you did not allow me to die, because I could have just been dead and that would be it. I mean, life moves on, but seeing where I am now, and most importantly, the grace and the opportunity God has given to me to also help other women. Because I realized that when I started sharing my story, it was unbelievable. So many women in the same position, pastors' wives. I have them on my client base. That's my one-on-one coaches. Pastors' wives going through or that went through the same thing that I experienced. And I was like, this doesn't even make sense. But a lot of people won't come out to say anything because, again, they feel shame. They feel that guilt because the abuser has made them to believe that the abuse is their fault. So I tell my clients, the abuse is not your fault. It's nothing you did or nothing you did not do. It's just this person that has a problem. So there is hope. I say to people, there is life after trauma. Just come out and start from somewhere, because there is a whole lot ahead of you. God created you on purpose for a purpose. You're not an accident. You're not an afterthought. God did not think that, I need to make 7.5 billion people. I think on Monday, I'll make 1 billion. Tuesday, I'll make 500 million. No, he saw a need on the earth and he thought, I'm going to create Jola Grace because she's going to be needed to help people heal at this particular point in time. And that was why he sent me on earth. So it was, that responsibility was on me to heal and discover that purpose and begin to work in it. Someone asked me a question recently and says, what is your definition of success? And I said to the person, my own definition of success is to find your purpose and begin to work in it, because that is when you begin to have peace and you begin to have fulfillment. Thank you.
I love that. Find your purpose and begin to work in it. And welcome in Nikki LaShae. We're so happy to have you here. For those of you who don't know, Nikki LaShae is an actress, a host, producer, and she's a daughter of former painter Tanya Anderson and ex-NFL and CFL linebacker, William Johnson. She is the eldest child out of 6. 4 girls and 1 boy. Nikki LaShae attended Georgia State University, where she majored in theater and pulled out to recover after a car accident. And she grew up around abuse. So Nikki, I just want to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about yourself and why this topic is so important to you today.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, ladies, for having me be a part of this discussion. My experience with abuse really stemmed from not even having the awareness of it, oddly enough. So growing up in an environment where there was abuse on multiple levels, physical, emotional, verbal, and mental, and kind of adapting that into my adulthood and how I was able to exist in relationships that were also abusive. And I caught some of the words that you were saying, Dr. Grace, about it's kind of like a mind trick that is being played, and it traps you into this perpetual cycle where you are taking on abuse and being a part of perpetuating it, because you can't quite see, up from down and left from right when you're in it. And that became my existence for a while. I ended up being in abusive relationships myself on varying degrees, and not being able to really recognize it. And it really took this journey of just self-awareness, and underneath that, self-love, appreciation, addressing a lot of issues of self-worth, that stemmed from my own childhood. A lot of these things are just passed down, and passed down from our mothers, who also didn't deal with their own issues of maybe self-worth and awareness. And so we kind of enter our own journeys, respective journeys as women, from that foundation, and it's building on shaky ground the entire time. So I've had to kind of break everything down, strip all these layers away, and just reconstruct myself in a way that made me feel really fortified in who I am, really grounded in who I am, and foundationally from a place of worth, where I feel valuable in myself just inherently, instead of relying on someone else or an external thing or person to really validate me in that way, because that also is, to me, in my experience and an observation, a key reason why abuse is allowed to go on for so long, or why a victim allows himself to stay in a situation for so long, because their worth is rooted in the other person. And so so it's kind of like these puppet strings always being, pulled, on you. And so just doing that self-work really put me in a position of power. It allowed me to get my power back. And so the way I'm moving through life is so different. It feels different in some ways, and it's new, so that's my journey. And it's something that I want to pass down something different to my daughter, so she can build from a different place, a healthier and whole foundation that's strong. And so yeah, that's my journey.
Wow, thank you, ladies, for just sharing a piece of your journey with every single person in this space. When I think about this, I'm reminded of our theme scripture, which is Zechariah 13:6, and it says, and one shall say unto him, what are these wounds in thine hands? And he shall answer, those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. And when I think about that scripture, I think about the first time that I saw bruises on a family member. And I inquired, why, what does this come from? Why, what happened? And there was immediately an excuse of, oh, we were just playing, and this happened as a result of that. And, my triggers were on at this point, right? And I'm sure many people have experienced this, especially those who are just in this space where they have those question marks, like, what do you do when you start to notice these indicators that someone is being abused and someone has or is on the verge of that happening? Because you can tell about the temperament or the anger and how things are continuing to escalate. We've heard stories from Victoria, how she reached out to her friends and her family and said, listen, hey, I need help. Like, my mom needs help. We heard from Dr. Grace, where she said, listen, I was surrounded by people who felt that this was acceptable. And it wasn't until I got in the space by divine appointment with someone who was able to share with me, this is wrong. We heard from Nikki LaShae say, hey, listen, I've been in this space. And it wasn't until I started doing the self-work that I began to realize that this is not okay. This is not the way that I'm supposed to be treated. And so I think a lot of times, especially for those of us who are in church and we see these, we would have never thought that we would see a scripture that talks about some form of abuse in the Bible, but there it is. And so we recognize that it does exist. inside of the church and outside of the church. And so when we start to think about abuse and what the Bible says about abuse, what are some of the things that you all have shared with women to help them, or men, right? Because we know that men and women experience abuse. What have you shared with those who are experiencing this and they start to think, like you were saying, Dr. Grace, hey, maybe this is what's supposed to be. Like maybe this is love. And I remember when I shared with my family member, but I would love to hear what you all are sharing. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Grace, and then if time permits, I'll go to Victoria and to Nikki as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much again for this platform. I think for me, one of the things that I say to people, especially people who are around people who are victims, you know, their family members, their friends, is to believe them. First of all, it takes a lot for a victim to come to a place where they want to say, help, I'm being abused. It takes a lot because, like I said initially, there's that mind work that goes on. The perpetrator conquers the mind of the victim first. It's all about the mind. Our mind is our greatest asset. No wonder the Bible says, guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it comes the issues of life. You will notice that a lot of times, 98% of the time, abusers are very intelligent people. They are intelligent, very calculative, especially if it's a narcissist. Ooh, they are like very intelligent, because before you can manipulate another person's mind, you will have studied that person, knows what makes them happy, know what makes them tick, know the right buttons to press. So when a victim goes through all of that experience and they come to a place and they realize, I'm being abused, and they tell someone, and the family or friend doesn't believe them, it's like you are adding, they already have a wound in their soul. It's like you are actually hammering that wound, like, I don't believe you. And it hurts, and it makes the victim goes back into their shell. So I say to people, when they come, even a lot of times the story will sound ridiculously unbelievable. It will be as if they are exaggerating. Sometimes when I tell some of my experiences to people, they are like, are you serious? Are you making that up? But no, it happened. I'm telling you, it happened. Because already the perpetrator is already telling the victim that what they think is real is not real, gaslighting them.
Right.
Oh, it's in your head. It didn't really happen. So when they go and meet somebody else, please believe them. Even if you don't understand, even if you feel it's been just say, I believe you, I'll support you. I'm here for you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think it's so important for us to recognize that we should not take any form of someone reaching out to help lightly, right? Because it takes so much to ask for help. Right. And so when they finally at a place where they're asking for help, to be ignored, to feel like they are being isolated even further, that creates that sense of hopelessness. You know, Victoria, I want to come to you next with this question. You know, we're starting to hear more and more about higher numbers of domestic violence in the Black and Brown community, especially. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it seems to be so prevalent within the Black and Brown community?
Well, I think sometimes statistics and numbers point to us because we are the ones that have to go to public places for help. And sometimes the numbers are similar in other cultures, but because they don't have to go outside of their circle for a doctor or for resources, sometimes the statistics are not even. So that's just kind of one of my things. I used to work for a doctor, and those years, my kids never had to go in the doctor's office. We just went downstairs and he opened his little medical bag and did whatever. And my eyes were really open because I'm like, this man could do abortions, he can do, all kinds of things, and people never know, but we in the Black and Brown community often have to go outside to these clinics and what have you. So it appears that the numbers are higher in our community. That's one thing. That's one of my soapboxes. I'm sorry if I got on one that's
No, I think it's relevant, and I think we also have to understand that is going to affect the numbers, right? And those numbers are telling a story, but are they telling the complete story? So I think you're asking the right question, and you're pushing out the information for us to be thinking and pondering. Are we getting the right numbers based upon what's truly happening in our world? And I would say that we're getting maybe a good number from within certain communities, but in communities where they have a higher number of resources to cover it up or to not have to document their experiences, then they tend to not have to, those numbers are not being captured. So I appreciate that, Victoria. You're absolutely right in that space.
I had a Caucasian friend who was going through domestic violence, and because her white husband knew where to hit and where not to, it was never exposed in the church. And the stigma there was even greater than what I experienced in the Black church, because
I agree with you. I think also, I think there are other ways of there's probably different ways that different groups abuse. So where you might see more physical abuse in one particular segment, you may see more mental and emotional and financial abuse in another group, because basically whatever your power is or whatever your implement of punishment inflicting hurt is, that's what you're going to use. And so I think sometimes the bruises that you don't see may be even worse than the ones that you do see.
I love that.
And I do think, in the Black and Brown community, we do have a stigma of strong Black women, and, we can take certain things and we can be treated certain ways and it's no big deal. And somehow we've got to begin to, we discussed a little bit of this the last time we talked, and I really liked what Maureen and Nikki was saying about changing that image, that we're sensitive, we're soft, we're women, we're not workhorses.
Right.
So
yeah, I think that has to do with that I'm gonna kind of deviate into the whole area of pornography is at epidemic numbers, and we can't say it's, when you have 80% of men addicted to porn, those 80%, those include men that are in church, unfortunately. So,
right.
And if you don't understand, like there's a whole saying, if you don't understand how to use something, you end up misusing it. And there's abuse when you don't properly respect a person's body or their spirit. You will inflict things on them that you've normalized because you have an addiction. So in terms of what we put up with as women, I think our nature is to protect and to nurture even when things are difficult. And being Black women, we are by nature and have been trained to be resilient and to protect those who may seem, we protect our men, like even against to our own hurt at times. And we have to be more vocal in saying things like, this hurts, I'm not comfortable, creating boundaries to protect your spirit. Because if your spirit is broken, how's it fixed? It's right.
Yeah, I love that. And that leads me to the next question. Like, how do we create healing? How do we even get to that place? And Nikki, LaShae, I would love for you to share on that, because you were talking about the self-work that you had to do on your journey to even get to the place. And I'm sure that there are some spaces in there that we recognize that there are some times when we start that healing path that we start to realize that there are things that are missing in that journey. So if you would share, how do we create healing? And then what are some of the things that you notice that are missing from that process that we tend to not ignore sometimes, or maybe we just don't know that it's missing, it's a missing piece?
Yeah. I think that the first step with the healing process is to be honest about it, and to be honest about some of the ugly truths of that. Honesty doesn't mean that it always feels good to realize something happened to you or that you grew up a certain way. But I think that we have to, the second part of that is knowing that there's something on the other side of that. So the realization is just so you can get to the other side. It's not so that you can kind of just swim in the grief of it all, but you can only get to the other side if you are honest about, what's going on and what happened to me, and shedding the shame of that. And a part of shedding the shame is, again, just being honest about what happened. Like, man, I was in an abusive relationship. Man, I did have an abusive father. And man, what happened, the way my mother trained me was not right. Like, I actually had to have a conversation with my mom, because somebody brought up how they came to someone to tell them that they were in an abusive situation. The response was kind of unkind. And oftentimes we get that from our own mothers and from our own family. And that is a harsh truth that I think that we have to honor ourselves even above these relationships, that we tend to put before ourselves. So, I had to actually tell my mother, by the way, if this was the advice that you were given, it was not right. How you were treated in the midst of your abuse was not right, to my elder. But who knows, whatever that motivation was for me spiritually to say that may have been the unlocking that her spirit needed, because nobody told her it was okay to speak her truth. Nobody gave her permission to feel safe enough to say this happened to me. And I think that alone has hindered a lot of people from getting to the other side of that. And who knows, what path that could have unlocked for them spiritually, mentally, physically, whatever, what have you. So the first thing of healing is to be honest and know that in your honesty, there is something on the other side of that, which is grace, which is freedom, which is healing, which is unlocking. And that's different for everybody, what that unlocks in you. And I believe that there are some very tangible steps that people can take. I got therapy. Like, I have no qualms about it. And I think that in our community, we have to, I'm from the South, I'm from Mississippi. So there are certain things that we are taught we just don't talk about. We just kind of brush things under the rug. We don't bring up the past. These are things that are commonly said, but all of these notions are very harmful, to just being able to navigate life as a healthy adult that makes healthy choices and that can be a part of healthy relationships. That's not what you should do. You need to face these things head on. You got to face your trauma. Know that, there is trauma in these situations where you have endured abuse. And so after the honesty part, it's understanding that you did go through a traumatic experience, and to allow yourself some grace and whatever time you need and whatever space you need to navigate that, and to ask the questions like, well, I ask myself, what is it in me that allowed me to stay in the situation so long? And that's not a guilt thing, but it is a self-awareness thing. I want to know myself better. And in knowing myself better, I can love myself deeper. I can give myself the things that I need. Okay, I was looking to be loved. I needed to be loved. Okay, what was my perception of love? This is what I thought love was. So now I'm getting somewhere. Now I can just ask myself questions because I've gotten past the shame. I've gotten past, what happened. I know that this happened to me. Okay, and I know that it made me feel this way. So when you face all these things head on, you don't hide anymore. So now you're unlocking just different layers as you are navigating the healing journey. And I'll say that the healing journey is not one-dimensional, and it's not a set time frame. I believe that as you begin to look at one thing, you'll find that there are other things underneath that even allow that to have, the space and time to manifest. And I think you just need to honor that journey, honor that path, and look at it as an adventure. Look at it as a worthy adventure of yourself. You are so worth knowing, worth understanding, worth navigating, and look at it like that. I think that especially just being a Black woman, we've been trained that these are shameful. It's shameful to talk about these things, and it's not. It's really just like it's an act of honor. It's an act of elevation, and I think that we need to shift our perspective on these things a little bit. And I think that we're in this beautiful time where a shift is happening, and we are having these conversations because something has just switched, and everything.
I love what you were saying there about the switch and how we're in this space where we can be more open to have these types of conversations. And really, I think part of that switch is being able to have these conversations within the church, within this space that, we always look at the church as a hospital, and we start to find that within this hospital where we have the expectations that things are going to happen a certain way, that they don't always happen that way. And that's because maybe people didn't have the tools or the resources to address these types of problems, or the knowledge to be able to do that. And so as we start to look at that, and start to navigate through that, I want to put this out there to the group, and I hate that I'm running short on time, but I think it's really important for us to understand, and wrap our heads around. The question is, can the church be a safe place for abuse victims or victims of abuse? But I also want to add to that is, what do you see as resources that churches need in order to be that for abuse victims? Because I think that it's clear that we go to the church as a resource for rescue from those types of situations, but I don't know that every church is prepared for what those next steps need to look like. And so I want to push this out there. I want to go to Victoria. I know we haven't had a lot of time for you to talk, so I want to come back to you for that question. And then I'm going to turn this over to Maureen to keep the conversation going. But I think it's so important because I don't have the liberty to say which one of my family members experienced domestic violence, but I will say this, that through that experience, I recognized that we had to look at it differently within the church, and we had to respond to it differently within the church. And we could not turn a blind eye to the things that were happening. And we had to stand forward with boldness in order to curb the cycle of domestic violence. And so, Victoria, the question goes to you. Can the church be a safe place for victims of abuse? And what are some of the tools that you recognize that the church needs in order to be able to support victims?
Definitely. I know one of the things that was absent when I was trying to talk to churches about being involved was I didn't have social media or websites or anything like that to show people that there's ministries, there's churches, there's Christian individuals who are involved in this issue, and this is their results, or this is how they're going about it. I was just coming up with some ideas, and there wasn't any backing of this will work or what have you. I think prayer is so important that we begin to pray that if there are women or men or children, families involved in this crisis situation, that God would use us as a Christian community, as a church. And I'm going to go beyond just those four walls of the church and just say Christian community, to use us to help these women, to help them get to safe places, to know where we need to go for the educational piece, and that the women, the men, the children involved in these situations will come forward. And I believe if we open ourselves in that way, God will begin to work out the situation. Secondly, I think that we need to normalize. There needs to be more sermons on the subject, more women's conferences. I can't even remember. I mean, I went to hundreds of women's conferences as a teenager, young adult, and adult. I don't remember one of them talking about domestic violence, one workshop, or one woman even coming forward and saying, this happened to me and this is my testimony. So I think we need to encourage more normalizing this within the church community, encouraging pastors to preach on the subject, and there'll be teaching on the subject. And the last thing I want to say is we've got to be able to be patient with women who are going through this. I think Nikki brought that point up too, that there's no timeline on this. When I was in it, they would say a woman has to go back 7 times before she finally says enough is enough. And I mean, it might not, I mean, that number might have increased by now, I don't know. But so it said to me as a worker that I have to be patient with this woman. And sometimes, you know, when you do all this work, especially as a caseworker, I would, you know, get an apartment for a woman, get her set up in a job, knew everything. And then 2 months later, here she back in the shelter. And I mean, you just want to say, okay, you know, but God would remind me, no, you know, keep that connection, keep that, be patient with her, you know, work with her, try to understand why she may have gone back into the situation. Because what happens many times in domestic violence is family and friends, they get so frustrated with the person because they're, you know, seem like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna get my life together, I'm gonna separate from this person, and boom, then they're right back. And so the tendency is to cut them off, and that pushes them further into the arms of the abuser. So I believe the church has to be a place where you can come as many times as you need to come, and we will still be here for you. We will still try to offer support, a safe place, do what we can to help you, because we realize this is not an overnight thing.
Wonderful. So, there are a couple of things I wanted to kind of list as what I think would be next steps for the spiritual community to kind of to stem this epidemic of domestic violence. One is forgiveness. You know, acknowledge and forgive yourself and the person who's been the perpetrator of the violence. The other is to seek pastoral care and visits. Encourage your pastor, invite your pastor to come to your home, and pastors should visit the sheep. You know, pastoral or ministerial visits. Have deacons reach out to the members of the congregation and to see what's going on in the household, not to shame, but to say, hey, we're here for you. If we see there's an issue, we want to be part of the solution. I also think there's a need for accountability for men. You know, if a man sees another man behaving in a violent or abusive way towards his partner, that another man should speak to him privately. You know, go to him and say, you know, what's wrong? Why is this happening? You know, and this is not scriptural. And to help that person identify that there is a problem. I also think it's really important to elevate self-love in the church, you know, because if you don't love yourself, you really are not equipped to love anyone else and to be in a relationship with another person. And self-love doesn't mean some sort of narcissistic approach to elevating yourself above other people, but to know your worth in Christ. And when you know how much you are worth in Christ, then you can treat other people with the same level of worth. And then the other thing I would really like to do is to promote soft Black love, you know, soft Black love, and how we treat one another, how we speak to one another, how we reach out to one another, how we address one another, and also seeing our children as being our talent, the talent meaning the gift that God has given us that we can invest in, and have that return to us 100-fold. You know, my best example in speaking of this is the movie King Richard. We see the father of Venus and Serena investing his blood, sweat, and tears into the success of his children. And I think that when we do that with our children and with one another, the ones that God has given us steward to be over, we're going to see a renaissance in our communities like we've never seen before. So those are my thoughts. Ladies, I think Jola, did you want to add something? And then maybe one of the other ladies can close us out.
Yeah, thank you very much again for this platform. I think for me, Victoria said something about more women's conference where we can talk about these things. But I also think that there should be more men's conferences, because the truth is, I think a lot of times we talk to the women, we keep talking to the women, but then those women are going to go and marry these guys, and nobody's talking to the men. So I think that the men also need to start talking to the men. They need to have, because the truth is, there's something. So I'm an NLP practitioner, neurolinguistic practitioner. One of the presuppositions of NLP is that every act stems from a positive intention. So no matter what, like, so you ask, oh, so even the person is the killer. Yeah, there's a reason. The reason why they killed, yeah, the act is wrong, but the intention is always positive. So even the abusers, a lot of times, maybe they grew up seeing abuse. So, I mean, my ex-husband, I got to know, I mean, while I was having a conversation with his mom, while I was still in the marriage, that there was abuse also that happened with his parents. So he saw it growing up. He could probably have told himself, oh, I'm not going to do this, but then he does it. So a lot of times the abusers, so there was a practical example now of another guy whose first marriage, the woman was abusing him. The first marriage, the woman was the abusive one, she was narcissistic. They got divorced, and then the man told himself, no woman is going to treat me like this again. He then became the abuser in the second marriage. So it's like, that was a circle. So I think that something needs to start happening for the men. Okay, so let's even put the men to one side. Our boys, as our boys are growing up, we really need to start telling them, this is how you should treat a woman. This is what you shouldn't do for a woman. This is so, even sometimes, so I have two boys and a girl. My first is 20 years old. And I made sure that, I mean, that's another story that I don't even want to go into tonight because we don't have time. He only just started, he started living with me in December, after like 5 years. And one of the things that I told myself I was going to be intentional about is to tell him how to treat a woman. So when I see him do something, I'll say, you don't treat a woman like that. If a woman asks you for this, you do this because I'm intentional. So I think that also in the church, we need to start having programs that are specific to both the male and the female at different ages. And of course, like you said, normalize, talking about these things, probably setting, also maybe the church is having professionals at hand, because the fact that you're a pastor doesn't mean you can counsel someone who is going through trauma or having. So let us have professional and let the pastor be able to say, look, I'm a pastor, I'll pray for you. Go and speak to a therapist, go and speak to this person, because sometimes the pastor wants to do everything. You might be a pastor, but you can't operate to patients because you don't have the skills. So the same thing when it comes to counseling and therapy, they need to allow the professionals to deal with it.
Thank you so much, Nikki.
Yes, I love tagging on to what Dr. Grace was saying, and going even deeper into that. I've found that mental health is just a huge, huge part of this whole thing. And if a lot of these men are just trying to get their power back, like a lot of these men lost their power in childhood through like sexual abuse, and there are not enough spaces for men to purge their spirit of these things because of, the perception, So I think if the church was able, because the idea is that it is supposed to be the safest space. And so if we can just be more, if we can lighten that and make that more true across the board, whether that show up in programs, or offering therapeutic services that work with the spirit, like almost like a spiritual therapy, you know what I mean? To help men find their way back home so that they can show up in their actual physical homes in a secure way, so that they're not projecting these issues onto the women. I think that that's a great place to start. And then for the women, I think honestly programs that for women that are actually seeking like asylum to get away, we need programs that offer like financial resources, jobs, housing, something like that, because oftentimes women go back because these men are financially abusive as well. I mean, it's always like two or more abuses, so it's a control thing. So the woman is not going to have resources to leave. And if she does, it's very temporary. And God forbid she has children in this whole thing. She almost has no choice, you know. And then of course you deal with, you know, other people who may not, you know, I believe Victoria was talking about it earlier, like people's patience wears thin. And so if the woman goes back, they're not understanding the mental issue of it all, the mental abuse of it all. So they just kind of write her off. She's going to go right back. But if she had the resources to keep moving forward in life, you know, feeling like she could actually make positive advancements when she's away from this, you know, toxic individual, I believe that women would opt for this option. So if we had programs in place that would allow women to function independently of the abuser, that would be amazing. And if we had programs that allowed men to heal in ways that would allow them to show up in their masculine, instead of projecting unhealed wounds onto their women, I think that those would be extraordinarily helpful things for the church to do.
Okay, well, thank you so much, ladies. This will be for round one of several conversations we'll be having around how the church can work with the congregation, how pastors and ministers can work with victims of domestic and partner violence in creating healing and safety for both men and women and children. Thanks again, ladies, and be blessed, and we'll speak again. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.